So we got some good news, uncharacteristic good news with regards to the labor market. Let's go ahead and throw this tear sheet up on the screen. So for the first time ever, the average pay for supermarket and restaurant workers tops $15 an hour. Now, it's important to spell out what this does not mean. That means it's the average. That means there's still a lot of people, roughly half of supermarket and restaurant workers who are not earning $15 an hour. But, you know, there's a lot to be said here. First of all, I think it's a real victory for the fight for 15 that sort of set this benchmark of what a wage should be and the bare minimum of what a wage should ultimately be. And then you do also have what Professor Richard Wolff described to us as sort of like a great working class awakening of demanding more. Like, I'm not just going to go throw myself back into these jobs that you pretended were essential but treated like crap. I'm not going to just, you know, continue to force myself to cobble together a living from these 2 or 3 jobs. So you have all this cavalcade of business owners who are either complaining they can't get workers in or saying like, oh, I lifted the wages and now I have an amazing workforce and all the applicants that I could possibly want.
You know, Biden got a lot of crap from the right in that he gave a press conference and remember, he was told, oh, people can't hire enough workers now. And he leans into the microphone and he's like, pay them more. And he got a lot of crap from the right. Where they're like, this is ridiculous. This guy doesn't even understand how the economy works or how business works, silly. And it's like, this is actually a great example that they're doing the thing that he said they should do. And so now workers are getting paid more. And I think that's a phenomenal thing, and you should think that too, because yes, it is the case. If you got, you know, a $1,400 stimulus check, if you can benefit from the expanded child tax credit, you also had some stimulus money that came in at the end of Trump's time in office. So if you're getting the stimulus checks, you had the expanded unemployment insurance as well. If you're getting all that coming in, now I look at that and say, great. So you made it so that now you could pay your bills and maybe, just maybe, you have a little bit of an extra cushion to determine, is this job really the one I want to do for the rest of my life? Because I feel pretty shitty doing it and maybe I want to find a new job. And if it takes you 2 months or 3 months to figure out, hey, this is the field I want to work in, God bless. Go right ahead. I'm happy that workers now have that wiggle room and that freedom. And if anything, you know, I would go further on that front. I would make sure that everybody has that ability.
Absolutely.
And if the unemployment rate ticks up just a touch in the meantime, well, guys, that's okay. I honestly don't think that's the most important economic indicator that there is. A great example from a professor in college that I remember is he said, you know, it is possible to have 0% unemployment, right? People in the class were like, we didn't know that, number one. But number two, we should definitely do that because 0% unemployment is awesome. And his response was, that would be slavery. You could force everybody to work and have 0% unemployment, but would you harp away on the fact we got 0% unemployment? This is a positive thing. It's like, no, you're fucking slaves.
Right.
So that's a problem. So I mean, this is a great sign. Obviously, what I would prefer is either $15 minimum wage at the federal level, or actually the thing I really prefer is they wouldn't do this in legislation, but if only we lived in the world where they could. If I was emperor for a day, you do it either by voting district or by county. You do a living wage that way. So yes, it might be the case that in, I can't say this word, rural Wyoming, that it's like $9.75 an hour, but it also might be the case that in New York City, it's $24 an hour. You know what I mean? And that would make it so everybody has a living wage wherever they are. That also has some issues, but I think it's the least bad option economically.
I wish I was remembering the numbers off the top of my head about, I mean, there are very few places in the country where you can even consider $15 an hour living wage at this point.
That's right.
So, you know, there may be somewhere in rural Wyoming that...
Rural.
where it would be less than $15 an hour, but actually if you had that system, overwhelmingly it would be set at higher than $15 an hour because there are very few places where you can survive even on that. I mean, it also goes to show you the low bar that has been set and also the brainwashing that has occurred, that the instant reaction from Washington, including Joe Biden, to the fact that, you know, there's all these job openings, there's a historic number of job openings right now, and there are some business owners who are saying, gee, I'm having a hard time hiring workers, that the reaction to that isn't, well, what can we do to make it better for the workers to like entice them into these jobs? The reaction is always like, what can we do to punish these workers? Force them into jobs that they don't really want to take. And that was the Republicans all did it. Plenty of Democrats did it as well. There were a few, good guys who saw through how ridiculous that is and see how that's always the instinct is like, we're never going to put anything on the business. It's always the workers who need to be punished and coerced and forced to do the crappy job at poverty wages that takes them away from their families and has them working insane shifts and hours like the Frito-Lay workers that I know you and I both covered on our shows. And then the other thing too as well is wages for working class people have basically not budged in decades. So the fact that there's any minor uptick is like, whoa, I mean, it's like really a cause for celebration. And it truly is. I mean, it really is a good sign in the fact that we've broken that pattern, that multi-decade long pattern, but also we're so far behind where wages should have been if they had kept pace with productivity the way that they used to. I mean, we used to have this relationship, this economic relationship that was so ironclad. It was written into the textbooks that I'm sure you and I both studied in college of like, as productivity goes up, wages go up. That hasn't been true since the 70s, okay?
Right, yeah, that's right.
The fact is that all of the gains to the economy have inured to the corporations themselves and the very rich. And workers have been completely stagnant. They're producing more and more and more and getting basically none of the gains. So we're way behind where wages ultimately should be. But of course, it's a great sign that there's a little bit of movement there, that things are shaken up a little bit, that at least a silver lining of the pandemic and some of the relief efforts that were put into place, which I think were inadequate. And I take a lot of issue with the way that they structured these and the fact that they've handed a lot more power to our foremost billionaires and monopolists. But at least that gave some people the ability to shift careers, to move locations even to places that they can have better quality of life, to reassess how they want to live their life, to be able to have a little bit of choice. I mean, that's what you're really talking about is we have all of this illusion and all of this language around freedom and choice and all of this in America. But the reality is for most people, where they live, and if you don't have, a college degree, or even many times if you do have a college degree, you don't have a lot of choice in terms of the jobs that are available to you. So it seems like some of the pandemic era programs and the realities provided people with a tiny bit of optionality and power, and that is a very good thing.
Yes, and that chart you're referring to where you have productivity and wages and how there's just this massive decoupling in like the early 1980s, it goes like that and it keeps going like that. Yeah, nobody in Washington, D.C. really talks about that. Nobody in the media really talks about that, but that's something that, we've talked about quite a bit. Just to give a little bit more information on that, this is even pre-COVID, half of workers in the U.S. made $30,000 a year or less. Wow. Half of workers. And again, pre-COVID, we had 78% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. And it is the case, because I covered it on my show, that there were Republican politicians who would go on Fox Business or go on CNBC, and they would openly argue, like, what we need to do is cut the unemployment insurance and force people back into the jobs that pay $7.25 an hour. And so, like, let's cut off their lifeline and force them into a job that doesn't even pay a living wage.
Yeah.
Which is... I mean, that's just as bleak and dark as it gets because, they would never say that about for their kid. They would never say that about anybody in their family or for themselves. But for others, it's like, get the peasants back to work.
Right.
And that's how they think of them.
That is exactly how they think of them. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll have more content for you later. Have a good one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.